Hi, everyone. Welcome to a family meeting. This is our first time on YouTube. Usually we have this on Zoom. Family meetings are a place where you can talk about everything about parenting and, be open and share your experiences and your thoughts so that others feel less alone. My name is Cindy Hovington, and I'm the founder of Curious Neuron. And if you are new to Curious Neuron, welcome. Curious Neuron is all about bringing you evidence-based parenting advice. And you can find our podcast and our website at curiousneuron.com, some blog posts. You can follow us on Instagram at curious_neuron. And today we have a special guest, Shivani, who is the founder and CEO of Brightlobe. And we're here to discuss how to become a mindful parent. Hi, Shivani.
Hi, Cindy. How are you?
I'm very well. I'm so happy that you're here with us today and that you were taking the chance with me on this YouTube live. I'm going to go see I'm going to open up the comments. So if any of you are here today for this YouTube live, please feel free to ask us your questions. That is the whole part of this these family meetings. It's really a place for you to open up and to share your experiences and to ask us questions. So every single month we have a different topic, and it's really a great way to grow together as parents. Because as you know, with Curious Neuron, I look at 3 pillars of parenting. You have to nurture yourself first, your child, and each other. And this is the each other part. This is the community aspect of parenting. So I'm going to just change just a second. I'm just going to change this to our topic. So this is my first time using this, just getting used to all the aspects of this. But yes, so how about we begin by defining what we mean by mindfulness?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. And what's really interesting about it is that even researchers that are looking at mindfulness from sort of a scientific perspective, taking an academic viewpoint, often find it difficult to really define exactly what it means, because there are 2 real definitions, I suppose. When people think of mindfulness, they often think of sort of a meditation-based practice whereby you are keeping aware of what's happening in the present. But other researchers, like Langer at Harvard University, would have the definition that mindfulness is just sort of the ability to keep in touch with what's going on in the present moment, even away from this concept of meditation. So there are really those 2 definitions. And what I think is really critical and important for families to realize is this isn't really about sitting sort of really still on a chair or sitting cross-legged on the floor and trying to get yourself into this really Zen state. This is about a practice where we look around at our environment, at our body states, at our emotions, at how we think and feel, and just become really aware of those, not being distracted by what's going on in the world around us, but by really coming back to ourselves. And so I think that's what mindfulness truly means.
I think it's such an important topic for us to be discussing because now, a year and a half into this pandemic, even especially as parents or other people, but parents, we've been in a situation where we've lost control sometimes, it's the stress of everyday life, and it's being with the children, not being able to step back and have a moment alone for the past, year and a half. And mindfulness, and I love that the topic today is a mindful family, because there's lots that we can do, not just as the adults, but with the children as well. And I think we'll touch upon all of that today. But yeah, and I think you're right. Sometimes I speak with parents, and when I talk about mindfulness, it's almost like just a word that we're throwing out there. But what does it mean, and what can we do? And sometimes it seems like such a huge endeavor to kind of be mindful. And how do you start? So how about we bring it back to today's topic as well? When you say mindful family, what do you mean by that?
So I mean a family whereby every member of that family is sort of conscious and aware of not only how they're feeling, but fully present with other members of the family as well. It's really a term that relates to being as present as possible in the current moment. And so when I think about what that means as it pertains to my family, practically, it means things like listening with curiosity, really sitting there and practicing active listening. And I think when I say active listening, this is a real practice that people have to cultivate. Mm-hmm. Usually when you're sitting down and you're speaking to your child, often it's so easy to become distracted, and it's completely understandable, especially as you've rightly pointed out, in a pandemic situation when you have so many distractions and everything is competing for your attention. You know, what does it mean to actually sit there and really tune into what your child is saying? And how do you also inculcate those values into your children, where they sit down and they're really listening to the words that are coming out of your mouth as well? So it's a two-way street. Communicating with self-awareness and awareness of how the other person might be feeling. So that's kind of where compassion comes in a sense. Intentionally practicing sort of appreciation and gratitude of what's going on in the present moment, what's happening around you, instead of sort of thinking back to a past that was really interesting, or perhaps it felt a little bit safer. So for us in this post-pandemic, or I guess we're not post-pandemic quite yet.
Yeah, we're hoping.
But in a world where hopefully we're nearing that stage, I often might find myself, and I'm sure the case is the same with you, Cindy, that we often look back to the past and we think, oh, you know, those were the good old days. Those were the golden years.
Yeah.
And we look to the future and we think, you know, somewhere situated in the future, there's going to be this time where my family perhaps feels a bit safer, more comfortable, where our communication is eased, where things don't feel quite so tense and stressful. But really the power of now is just harnessing the ability to be present and to find the peace and tranquility and that serenity in the moment where you are. Mm-hmm. So I think that's what it means. And I think with kids, one of the things that I absolutely have to talk about is playing, right? So when you're playing, are you completely present? How do you kind of bring yourself back to where you are? And there are lots of ways that you can start to practice this in a more practical sense.
I had put up a poll question on our Instagram account, and I asked, what is the one thing you wish you were more of with your child? And it was over 80% that voted being present. And I get it, because in this world that we're in, our phones are always vibrating or beeping, or there's something coming in, or we're thinking about what to make for the next meal, or we're thinking about the laundry that has to get done, or the baby, when we have to feed them. There's so much going on. And I think for me, what has helped is when you kind of schedule in those moments, and it doesn't have to be an hour. You know, I get it that we all have things to do, but it doesn't have to be that full hour. But just being present, like you said, that word is so key. Because then everything feels a lot different when you're present with your child. And I know you mentioned play, but as a parent, and as I know some people that are on now listening to us, when we have a toddler and they're having a full meltdown or a tantrum, and we're like, mindful? What is mindfulness at this moment? Because I'm just about to yell, or I'm at my limit. This is like the fourth tantrum of the morning. But there is a way to be mindful in that moment. I've been learning this past year, you know, forcefully, in the sense that I had to push myself to learn all this and to work on this. But how do we apply mindfulness when there's chaos in our home or there's a meltdown?
Well, it's really interesting if you sort of think about the words that you're using here, Cindy. So chaos, meltdown, there's a tantrum. And these are all very emotionally loaded words, and completely understandably so, because it's an emotionally loaded situation. But one of the critical aspects of mindfulness is this concept of non-judgmental awareness. And the idea is that because of evolutionary biology, our brains are created in such a way, or they've been refined in such a way, that every single stimulus that comes from the outside, everything that we perceive, gets a label attached to it, right? And the easiest label to attach to something is either this concept of good, this is a good stimulus, or this is a noxious stimulus. And what could feel more toxic in a sense sometimes than a full-blown meltdown? But the trick is to somehow recognize, and this is a concept obviously in neuroscience known as metacognition, which is sort of like thinking about thinking, being aware of your own thoughts and thinking that this tantrum is inherently neither bad nor good. Yes, it feels bad in the moment, right? Because you might be in a public place, you're feeling a bit nervous, you're wondering how best to cater for your child, you're trying desperately to understand what it is that your child needs. But there are good aspects of that, I suppose, if you would like to put that label on it. And there are aspects that are a little bit more uncomfortable. But by removing that loaded language a little bit, you get one step closer to the truth of the situation, which is just that it is a situation. You know, adding these labels of good or bad is usually what kind of takes you a little bit away from mindfulness in the present, because when you add these labels, that's when you're trying to adjust for the outcome in the future instead of paying attention to actually what's going on in the present.
Yeah.
So I think that is a key thing, is developing the ability to not necessarily regard a tantrum as a good thing or a bad thing, as difficult as that might be, because it really tries your patience, but trying to see, okay, what is this present situation trying to teach me? What are the things that I'm learning right now? And how can I best respond to this situation? Not necessarily as a bad or good thing, but be completely present with my child where they are and kind of meet them where they are in the present. And that's what I would say to that.
I love that. And because also when you're present in that moment with a tantrum, you might be able to see what they're communicating to you a lot better than when you're focusing on what it's causing or that emotion that it's causing in you. And I love that, because that's a huge part of parenting. And there's lots of research on that kind of parenting as well, where we're connecting with them. There's more warmth. Let us know in the question box, for those of you who are here, if you have any questions. We will give you an assignment at the end of this family meeting. But I think already with everything that you've said, there's a lot that we can already be applying or start applying in our own home. Now, you mentioned a word before, and I want to come back on it, because there was a study, I wrote it down because Duncan in 2009 had this really wonderful study that I sent to you, because it really talks about mindful parenting, and compassion is the one that stood out to me. When I started digging into this research, compassion was not something I had realized that was part of being mindful. And it's not just being compassionate towards our child, but it's to ourselves. And it goes back to that language, I think, of good or bad. And then that leads to that chatter, that negative self-talk. And you're feeling like you're failing in that moment because your child's having a tantrum. But in essence, they're communicating to you, again, going back to that. But that compassion is not key, but a big part of this mindfulness as well, and something that we can work on ourselves as parents.
Certainly. Yeah. And I would say to that, Cindy, you're absolutely right that it's a natural outcome of practicing non-judgmental awareness.
Exactly.
Because when you stop using, or when you, I suppose, become aware, I should say, of using those labels, even as far as it pertains to your own parenting, you become comfortable with what is. It's not about necessarily having the incorrect response or bad response as a parent. It is a response that can be fine-tuned, it can be refined, you can learn from what you did previously. It doesn't make you a bad parent or a good parent, for instance. It just makes you a work in progress. It's an iterative thing, right? And we all are that way. So I think that's where, again, non-judgmental awareness is crucial in creating that compassion for yourself and also for your child.
So now we've focused a lot on ourselves, and I'm assuming that everything we're talking about, we could, apply with our kids. But how does that translate? So now let's say we've worked on ourselves and we're being more mindful. How do we teach our kids, maybe even young kids or school-aged kids, how to do the same?
Yeah. So one of the things that I find really effective, and what's really come out in the literature, is this idea of diaphragmatic breathing, for instance. I mean, that's one practical technique that I can speak to. So there has been a lot of clinical evidence as far as what that entails. So diaphragmatic breathing, for those who don't know, is a type of breathing straight from your belly. And if you go on YouTube, or you actually check out one of our apps that's actually coming out quite soon, you can do it with your child. And it's a sort of deep breathing practice, which helps to regulate your state of arousal, so your state of alertness and awareness in your brain, so that it reduces that sense of anxiety and stress and tension. And that practice only needs to be about 2 to 3 minutes for you to see some real benefit from that. And those are practices, that's one practice that can really help your child start to emotionally self-regulate, to first understand when their emotions feel out of their control, sort of out of their grasp, and then help them to kind of regulate by using breathing as a way of regulating this arousal, this system in the brain that regulates stress and anxiety and flight or fight and all these other important, critical sort of biological things that we do need, but might not be relevant in the moment. For instance, for example, during a tantrum situation, if after a tantrum has sort of passed, if the storm has passed, maybe that's a really opportune moment to introduce this idea of, okay, let's hang on a second, let's take a few deep breaths, let's calm down. And then, as your child grows, perhaps that belly breathing becomes longer and longer. And so you're imparting these practices from really early on to help them self-regulate in the future. So that's one practice. I would also say things like body awareness practices. So even things like yoga, starting to understand how emotions affect them physiologically or in the body. Where are they feeling these emotions? If they're feeling angry, where do they feel that anger?
Mm.
And what that does is it has the added benefit of allowing children to kind of really understand how sort of the external environment really affects them, and give them a second to think about it and communicate that more effectively. And again, just by that sort of mindfulness practice, you're also improving your communication and that parent-child relationship. So those are two practices that I can think of, but there are many, many more.
But I think those are two that we could start implementing immediately, like of learning, teaching them that. And I never really used the deep breathing until I would say about 2 years ago, around the time I had my third child. And you would hear about breathing. And for those of you who might say like, how will breathing change everything? It really does. And I think when you become attuned a little bit and more connected to yourself, and you teach your child to connect to themselves as well, and you see how your breathing is when you're okay, and then you teach them in that moment, you notice your breathing is heavy, is faster, and it's you're not taking those deep breaths anymore. And when you do start practicing that, I've noticed that like it's almost like you're pausing time a little bit, like you're just in that moment, and it doesn't matter what's happening, but you're focusing on breathing in a heated moment, or even throughout the day. Parents often talk about like 4 p.m. ish becoming a little bit more difficult. You've had the whole day if you've been home with your child, and then you're thinking or being you're concerned that whether or not you'll get dinner on the table if it's been a difficult day. And having taking that time, like you said, it's only 2 to 3 minutes to really breathe and to take our time to connect with ourselves too. I think makes, for me anyways, in the past 2 years has made a big difference.
Well, can I just jump in and say as well, there's a fascinating study that I think you'd be really interested in looking at, which came out of Stanford University, where they identified a structure sort of in the nervous system where there are about 175 neurons that communicate how a person essentially is breathing in that moment. It's called the respiratory pacemaker. And this is one of the first bits of evidence that these types of breathing practices, like diaphragmatic breathing, absolutely do have an impact on a brain's arousal system or the ability to regulate arousal. So that's really fascinating, because it's sort of the first time that we've actually been able to prove that, these really quick, short breaths or these really deep breaths actually have a direct impact on your sense of wakefulness and alertness, and the way that you regulate stress as well. So it really does have an impact, and it's now measurable. So that I find that really interesting.
I love that. And you mentioned stress. I don't think we mentioned it yet, but anxiety and stress in kids and young kids is becoming more and more common. And I don't know if the studies have started coming out yet for the pandemic, but I know that, just speaking to teachers and people that working in schools, they have seen anxiety, levels going up with their students. I'm curious to see what the research will say, but this kind of practice is something, that can help a child a lot with anxiety. And I think, pandemic aside, there is research around that.
Some of the research actually regarding the pandemic has come out already. I think there were Chinese researchers that published a study very early on a small cohort in China after coronavirus reared its head over there for the first time. But then I think there have been follow-on studies and studies that are longitudinal studies now in progress that have looked at the impact of the coronavirus pandemic on children's levels of stress, and also their sort of psychosocial development as well. So how well they're sort of able to emotionally self-regulate, but also how well they're able to form relationships and attachments to other children as well as family members. And as you would expect, it's had a really, I would say, I'm trying to mitigate my language here, but it has had a huge consequence and impact on children. And so I think developing practices, mindfulness practices like these, is probably more important, perhaps in some sense, than it was pre-pandemic for that reason.
Yeah. I had interviewed for one of my podcast episodes Dr. Susan King, who's a researcher here at Montreal, and she studies women who are pregnant during hurricanes or any of these large, what do I call it? Natural disasters. And now they're studying the pandemic, obviously. But what struck me is that she said you can't alter the stress that comes from a situation like there's the the side where it's your interpretation of it. And I think that we can teach kids this aspect where, and I think that falls into mindfulness, but trying to not make it lighter, obviously, but to look at it in a different light and way helps a child like decrease that stress. So I think we can do that with their kids right now. And I'm looking forward to seeing her research come out too. But how about we talk a little bit about Kai's Sanctuary? I'm excited to hear more about it because we know parents who are listening as well or watching. Sometimes we need a break, and sometimes we also need help to understand how to teach our kids certain skills and how to help them. And I think this is a perfect example of both. So can you explain it a little bit to us?
I would love to.
And Brightlobe as well, actually, because I mentioned Brightlobe, but maybe some people haven't heard about it.
Sure. I mean, I can start with Brightlobe. So Brightlobe is, I'm the founder of Brightlobe, and it's a studio that creates mobile experiences to support neurodevelopment in children. So we take a very responsible view as far as screen time is concerned to imbue the experiences we create so that children really benefit neurodevelopmentally from using our games, for instance. And one of the main things we're working on right now is called a neurodevelopmental assessment, which has a clinical use, which is coming out sort of next year. But one of the projects and labors of love that we've been working on really is Kai's Sanctuary. Kai's Sanctuary was an idea that came to us as a result really of the coronavirus pandemic. Here in the UK, there's a sort of government associated agency known as Innovate UK, which provided us with grant funding to create an app for children because we wanted this technology to be readily available to children and no matter what situation they found themselves in, that would help them develop skills where they could learn to emotionally self-regulate as well as practice some of these social skills that perhaps would be lacking by being essentially isolated in the house. And so we went to work and we created this game where kids learn body awareness practices like yoga. They learn diaphragmatic breathing. They can listen alongside meditation practitioners and start to develop those practices. They can learn body scanning, again, another body awareness practice. It's a type of meditation, but they do it in an interactive format. And they do this all by helping this sort of veterinarian to magical creatures called Kai. So they've got their own little guardian. And by taking care of this guardian, by learning these skills of empathy and compassion, they earn little sort of treats that they can give to their guardian by playing these different games. And all of the games are related to essentially exercises that are found within mindfulness CBT, so cognitive behavioral therapy. So the entire game is evidence-backed in that sense. And we are releasing it in the next 6 to 8 weeks globally. So it will be available on the App Store and Google Play. But what we've done with that is we've really tried, and it's been tested in the UK first, a soft launch has already occurred here, to ensure that it's a really relaxing and educational experience for kids where they truly are developing these practices. And I was actually asked on another podcast, what's the best case scenario with this? I mean, do you want them to play the game forever? And I said, no, the best case scenario for me is actually that they learn and develop these practices. And this is their first sort of entry point. And then they won't need the game anymore. This is the first sort of way that they get introduced to these things. And then they kind of graduate from that and they're able to actually actively use these practices and exercises in daily life. So that's what Kai is.
I love that. I can't wait to see it. And I think that these are practices that I wish I would have learned this as a child. So these are practices that you really need later on in life as well. What age is it targeted for? What age group?
So it's 2 to 5. So it's early on. Yeah. It's interesting because we saw a dearth of apps. So not very many apps available for this age range where these practices were easily communicated. And so we worked really hard to be able to develop an experience where kids that young could meaningfully engage with it. And also, what's interesting is I've heard from parents that have tested it, that they've said that this was the first time that they've introduced an app to their child where taking it away wasn't difficult. It was just a very calm, relaxing experience, and they were happy to let it go. And that's kind of what we worked so hard to do, is create something that's genuinely useful for parents, a genuinely useful tool. Because there are so many, there are so many attempts at this, but it's really come from this space of how can we best mitigate the impact of this pandemic in terms of child psychology for children across the world and families across the world. So that's really where it's come from.
Mm-hmm. I think that this conversation we had is going to help parents, start off somewhere. We're giving them a starting point with this.
Yeah.
I like ending this with a bit of a take-home message or some sort of assignment that we can do, kind of bringing it down to like the main point of our talk. What do you think a parent could start doing tomorrow? Something that's simple enough, and then lead on to the next steps that we mentioned today.
Yeah, so until our app comes out, because you've got a yoga bit in our app as well, I would really recommend this app that I found, Downward Dog. And it's what you can do with that, which is really cool, is you can basically limit a relaxing yoga practice to about 10 minutes and do that with your child. Just go through the poses, learn how to do that together. And what's really interesting is the reason I suggest this as an exercise, either that or it's a deep breathing. Just find any meditation you can online, or wait for our app again, 6 to 8 weeks. And do that with your child. Start to practice this. I'd say that's a really good exercise. One thing I do want to leave on in terms of another study that I would recommend that viewers look at is something that's recently, again, come out of Stanford, which is that children basically went through an entire curriculum of deep breathing and yoga as mindfulness practices. And what they actually found was that their sleep time increased by about, I think it was about 75 minutes every night, which is absolutely incredible.
Wow,
because they tracked them over a series of time. Yeah, what was really interesting about this is that I think part of the study followed these participants as they grew older. And what they found was, obviously, as children kind of grow older, their sleep time comes down. But for these kids, that effect lasted quite, for the entirety of the fact they were following them. And 75 minutes is an incredible improvement.
So, any parent listening right now, they're like, I could do a lot in those 75 minutes, get extra sleep or get my day started.
So I would really recommend it. Yeah. I mean, the research is starting to bear this out. There wasn't a whole lot before, but the clinical evidence really is starting to tell us, what we already suspected. So that's what I would recommend. Deep breathing, maybe a bit of yoga.
Got it. I love this. Thank you, Shivani, for taking the time to chat with me today. And thank you. Yeah, I hope you enjoyed our first family meeting, and I'd love to have you back. I think that we can definitely have a follow-up conversation on this topic. Once that Kai's Sanctuary is out, we can see, maybe get some feedback from parents here. I'm going to let you go to have a little chit chat with the rest of the parents, and I hope that we chat soon again.
Yeah, fantastic.
Thank you. Bye. So much, take care. Bye-bye. Hi, everyone. I just wanted to end this live because, like I said, this is the first time that I tried this on YouTube Live. And sorry if I look away sometimes. I'm changing what's written at the bottom of my screen. I don't know if any of you were new today and that you've never been to a family meeting, but this is the whole point. Sometimes I have a guest, sometimes it's just me, but I love taking the time to tackle different topics for you every single month. The first Monday of the month is when we meet. We usually meet at 8:30 p.m. Eastern time. Today, I wanted to test out the afternoon as well. Let me know in the chat box if you learned something new today, if there's something that you will be applying, if you enjoyed the live. I don't know if the way that the cameras were set up, if it was good from your side, if you enjoyed this. And again, if you are new here to Curious Neuron, welcome. I am on Instagram at curious_neuron. Curious Neuron is a parenting resource that is evidence-based. So if you don't know me, I have a doctorate degree in neuroscience and I have postdoctoral training in education. And I love mixing the research from both. I sift through the literature and try to find articles that make sense for us parents. It's not about telling you how to do it. It's about finding research that makes sense. And then you figure out, or take whatever you want from it to apply to your own family, because only you know what's best for your family. I am a mom of 3. I have a 2, 4, and almost 6-year-old. And, I look for articles that just kind of resonate with me, that makes sense for my family. And I like to share that with you. So if there aren't any questions or comments, and if you enjoyed it, you can also visit my website at curiousneuron.com. And if you click on free webinar, you'll be able to see what's coming up next month on the first Monday of September, which is September 6th at 8:30 p.m. Eastern time, I will be talking about how to help, how to thrive as a parent. And what I mean by how to thrive as a parent is what can we do and what can we apply in our home, and little tips that we can start applying right now so that we feel that we are thriving as a parent, because this is a difficult time. Although things are getting a little bit easier depending from where you are, there are still lots that we can do. And that is all for today's family meeting. I so appreciate that you took the time to join me today. I hope that you will be there next time. Bye for now, and I will see you next month. Bye, guys.